Hey, everybody. It's the ACA podcast. I'm Billy Hoffman,
I'm Stephen Smith.
and we talk about adult children of alcoholics and dysfunction. We've been going through the traits of what they call the laundry list, and I do believe we're up to 9.
Yes, we're on to traits 9 and 10 today. As we say at the beginning of almost all of these, if this is your first one, if you're just jumping in, you're welcome to hang with us. But a lot of this will make more sense if you back up to the start of the series where we do a whole overview talking about what is the laundry list, what is ACA, who might benefit from it. And then we've done a series working through each of these different traits. And today we're going to be talking about 9 and 10.
And if you feel, any of these apply to you, I encourage you to listen to this with an honest and open mind and heart, because some of this stuff is difficult. If you never deal with how you got to where you are today, you're likely going to keep getting the same results, So some of the pain and suffering that you feel from time to time could very well be, in this laundry list. And if you go through and you work through each of these traits and see how it all started for you, you can start to unravel it all and then get to where you'd like to be.
That's the goal, at least, with this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it's worked for me, and it's been great. So let's get right into it. I'm going to read trait 9, and you tell me all about it. So the laundry list. We confuse love and pity. We tend to love people that we can pity and rescue. Sounds like a control thing, Stephen.
Ooh, tell me more about that.
More. We tend to love people that we can pity and rescue. It's not a balanced relationship. I have to feel like I'm up here rescuing and pitying this person. It keeps me from feeling threatened. That's part of what I hear in that trait.
Yeah, that's the reason I wanted to ask more is I think, strangely, I'm not really sure why, but when we do these groups where we talk about these traits, trait 9 has a lot of different interpretations. People find lots of different ways to connect into this trait. And so I'm not some authority on this list, who knows all of the answers, but I do think that you're onto something there. I think where it says we tend to love people we can pity and rescue. I might even add to the term control is people feel the need to be needed by other people. So if there's someone that I can pity and rescue, I know that they need me. And that probably, in addition to giving me a sense of control, it gives me a sense of security in the relationship. It gives me maybe a feeling that I matter in some way. And if I matter to this person, that's going to be kind of a source of self-esteem for me or self-worth. It's also going to give me a sense of security because if they need me,
they won't leave me.
Exactly.
If they need me, they won't leave me.
Your battery, your background cover. So where does this one come from? I think it can come from a lot of places. Some things that I think of are maybe even I'll just add some examples that I'll hear from people in groups. When they experienced caregivers who maybe were chronically absent or maybe not often all that attentive, not really giving a lot of love to them as a kid, kids often will need to find some other source of like love or even just attention. I've had a few people in groups say that they almost relate to this, and they said they would confuse love and attention. They said that's how they would edit this trait to connect into it. So things like I would always go to neighbors' houses, and my neighbors would always be like, "Oh, he's such a sweet kid," and would pay such attention to me, and they would give me snacks and feed me, and that made me feel like I was a part of someone else's family. And there's that sense of like that was filling a need, this void that I didn't have in my household or my family of origin, and that can kind of persist where it's like, I find ways to get attention, pity from other people in order to basically make me feel worthwhile. So that's the sort of one down approach. The person I'm describing there is the person who's being pitied, But again, the relationship can go two ways. So if I experienced that in my childhood, and I think that's how people show love to me, that might also be how I think I'm supposed to show love to other people. And then I'm going to pity and rescue them. And I think I'm loving them. But then there's this whole thing that you and I just talked about, which I'm ready to call like a secondary gain, where, oh, I think I'm loving this person, but really I'm pitying and rescuing them. But secretly, what it's also doing for me is it's making me feel needed. It's making me feel like
Gives me security. Yeah, it's ill-gotten security, but it gives me security.
yeah. Esther Perel is a couples therapist. She's, I mean, super popular and well known these days. But she has a great line about security in relationships. And, we do all these things to make ourselves feel more secure in our relationships. But she says that in reality, the best that most relationships can be is that this person is on loan to us with option to renew. They're not ours. We can't guarantee we're going to keep them forever. But the efforts that a lot of people go through to try to make themselves feel more secure that they're not going to be left cause a lot of problems in this kind of way. It's not a sustainable source of stability in a relationship, and it's certainly not a sustainable source of self-esteem.
Well, and I would imagine it causes people to be extremely clingy, trying to make sure that everything's just right to keep everything in place all the time. And
Yeah.
you see what I keep doing? The glasses. The thing with the glasses is like, where are my glasses? I think they're up here, but no, they're not. They're on the table. And the worst part is I put them on the table so I wouldn't have them on my head. And then now I'm putting them on my head and then my eyes, because we need to get to the other laundry list. We hate people who play the victim and beg to be rescued. And daggone it, Stephen, I don't know that I would say I hate them, but I don't like being around people that play the victim. I don't like crocodile tears. I don't like manipulation through the pity stuff. And I guess just from the way that I grew up, I'm highly suspect of it.
Yeah.
I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah. When you're around, or when you've been in your life around people who are doing some of that, who do they remind you of?
I feel like it definitely reminds me of myself at my very worst. During the worst years of my life, just how pathetic I became. Reminds me of, breakups from my mom, when I was growing up, and just how devastating all these things would be. It was just, because I didn't want her to feel bad, but it was a lot. It was a lot. And then over the years, in different relationships, I've had various shades of using that as like manipulation stuff. And so, I don't know. Yeah, actually, I can be cautious with that one.
Sure. I mean, thanks for sharing that. I think that's a really like a great example of how the laundry list stuff can look. The word resentment, I think, really comes to mind with this one. A lot of times people do say hate feels like a strong word, but this one can really touch on resentments that we have in our lives. If we had especially a caretaker whose needs always took center stage, whether it was like hysterical breakdowns, that kind of, or just like, manipulation, control, an angry caretaker who's no one ever cares about me. How come no one pays attention to me? That kind of my needs take center stage. That can be really challenging to grow up in a household like that, because a part of us might be like, I want to make sure that this person, my parent, is okay, and I don't want them to be suffering. I want them to think that I think that their needs matter. But there's another part of me that's like, yeah, but also, when am I going to matter at all? When am I going to matter? And the anger and resentment that can get kind of locked in from that over years is like when we run into people who either actually are, or maybe we just perceive to be playing the victim. It's like it touches that sore spot, and our resentment wants to come in and say like, I don't want to get near that person because like I know what that was like. And I hated that. That sucked. And so this one I think is one where people might find this getting triggered in certain environments. And it's certainly around with certain people. So, if you think, oh yeah, I do really detest, or I really don't like people who play the victim, some self-reflection of like, who in my life do I think has played the victim? Who does this person remind me of? Are they actually playing the victim? Right. Because, one of the things that comes up in groups when we talk about this is that, like, sometimes if we're really hypersensitive to the idea of that, we find it very hard to distinguish between when someone is wallowing in self-pity, playing the victim, and maybe when they're just being actually vulnerable. Sometimes when people are being actually vulnerable, but they're really emotional, because I'm so sensitive, I'm like, that's not real.
Or they just haven't figured out a way to regulate their emotions. So that's like what they're feeling is real. It's just it presents different.
Yeah, and so actually, I think the flip side, which we don't touch on the flip side for all of these traits in these podcasts, but this one, the flip side is like we have compassion. Yeah, and I think that that's really the idea with this is like whether or not they're playing the victim, it doesn't spark resentment or anger in us. We can have some compassion for maybe that's just where they're at. Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. I know in my case, I can have compassion and love and things like that. But there is something to be said, if you've been hurt or gaslit enough or whatever, the likelihood of you being a little standoffish on some things is high. I know that's where it comes, for me. And then keep in mind when I was actively addicted, I gaslit a lot of people.
Yeah.
I made them believe all kinds of things. It just wasn't real.
Yeah.
And so you have to really pause sometimes. And some days I have to accept I'm just not going to be happy either way and table it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I have to do,
Yeah, I think that's probably, there's something that's valuable in that for people across all of these traits. Like if people are trying to work on this stuff, like, it's a daily battle. And like, there's going to be times if I'm someone who, finds myself doing a lot of trait 9, there's probably going to be times that I slip back into it or I find it tough. And it's okay to like table it, come back at it the next day. Right. All right, let's talk trait 10.
All right. Do you want to do it?
Sure. So trait 10 on the laundry list side is that we have stuffed our feelings from our traumatic childhoods and have lost the ability to feel or express our feelings because it hurts so much. Denial, in parentheses. So this is, I would say, ironically, one of the traits that when people read this or when they hear it in groups, they get it right away. Like, I mean, this one is, I think, kind of exactly what it sounds like. So if you'll recall, like way back at the beginning, when we did our first podcast, I talked a little bit about how I view a lot of the laundry list traits as these are behaviors that we formed as an adaptation to something we experienced. And that's kind of what stuffing and denial is. So something in my childhood that I experienced was so difficult, so painful, that how I got through that is I stopped thinking about it, shoved it away to the corner of my mind. This can look like stuffing to the point of like I don't remember parts of what happened.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, I mean, that's common with a lot of people with parts of a childhood, but when people have experienced, childhood trauma, like we also know as trauma research these days that it's a common symptom that people can have difficulty remembering either important parts of or all of the different traumatic memories. So it can show up that way where like I just don't even remember it. But it also can have this other flavor where like maybe if someone asks us about it, we might remember it, but we're just sort of like, oh no, that didn't really affect me. Or we don't talk about it. We don't think about it. More like a passive stuffing as opposed to that, like I just straight up can't remember.
Yeah, there are, I know I definitely have had some of that stuff because often when I'm working through things, I think about, my father and then my second father. And there are things that I would like to be able to remember, to the point where I try to make myself remember, but there's, and during that period of time, there was a lot of weird things going on, so I just get bits and pieces, but there's no doubt about it. Stuffing is a real and denial. It's a real defense mechanism.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it is. It's trying to protect us from, the pain that we experienced back then, emotional pain or otherwise. I'm curious for you in your years of recovery work, did you find that like you remembered more things or different parts of stuff as the years went along or as you talked through and worked through stuff?
Yes, and so the initial memories, uh, the first batch of what came up were all of the things that I was most resentful about, specifically, and I was able to really do specifics with that stuff, because one thing kind of led to the next, to the next, to the next. But then as I've grown over the years, I've learned to look at all of these things in like a variety of different ways. I think I've told you, what one of the things that I did was I did a timeline on, how old were my parents in 1971 when I was born, and I see these young people. I have young people parents, and what was going on in the 70s? Well, holy cow, they just gone through all the stuff in the 60s, and the world was changing, and there's a revolution, there's all this stuff going on, and they're in the middle of all of it, and they're younger, and they've got a baby. They want, what are you going to do with this kid, And so they made a lot of mistakes. So from that perspective, and that is a gift of age for me, I think, and also the recovery work, because the recovery work allows you to really kind of put everything in the right box. And I mean, my experience is sometimes I put it in a box, and then I keep working on it, and I go, oh, wait a second, that's the wrong box. Oh, yeah, I need to move it over to this box.
Yeah.
Which is why this ACA stuff is so important, because I worked the 12 steps multiple times.
Yeah.
And ACA put a different spin and perspective on the whole process.
Yeah. I like that analogy a lot of like putting stuff in the box, but it's like a continual sorting process. You're sort of trying it in there and they're like, all right, I think that seems right, but we'll see. And then we just keep doing our work. And then it's like, oh, actually, wait, I learned something different about that. Or maybe I remembered something about it differently. Or I found that I felt differently about it as time went on. Maybe I can move things around. You develop a broader sense of perspective, I think. When people really come out of on the other side or the flip side of trait 10, it involves a lot of like confronting. So like acknowledging sort of the totality of what it was that we went through. And that includes like sometimes conflicting positive memories with some of these really negative ones. That's a hard thing for human beings because we like simplicity. We like categories. We want things to just make sense. And it can be really challenging to square in our minds. How can I have good positive memories with parts of my childhood and my parents, and then also had these wildly traumatic ones? And so for some people, I stuff the traumatic ones and say, I had a great childhood. It was all good. And I'm going to emphasize just positive stuff. Sometimes it goes the other way, but
Which is what I did. I went more the other way, and then as I've gone on, well, because everything was so, by the time I got into recovery, my life had just been a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff had happened. So what I could see was mostly negative, but there are times where I will do that, where I go, well, wait a second, yeah, this person also set this up or set that up, did these things with me, and that's helpful because it's not as, for me, I guess it doesn't feel like as big a rejection.
sure.
Sure. And I think that was the root of a lot of things, was this feeling of rejection, specifically from my father, especially. Yeah, and so, well, never my mother. I never felt rejected by my mother, ever. Yeah, by my father, for sure.
Yeah, I think that once people can work through kind of some core issues related to some of the stuff, it kind of allows them or frees up their vision to have a broader sense of perspective on the whole experience in that way. People who are listening to this, I mean, if you've chosen to listen to an ACA podcast, I imagine you've made it this far at this. I imagine you probably are someone who thinks I might have some dysfunction in my childhood. But I always encourage if people, are reading this and have found themselves having those thoughts of just sort of generally labeling, I had a good upbringing, I had a good childhood. I'm not here to say, oh, that means you had a bad one. I'm saying let's step away from just simple terms like good or bad, and let's just take a closer look. Like, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of experiences that you had, and encourage you to be curious about what did I experience? How might it have impacted me in positive or negative ways, or both? And once you get that full look at it, that's where you start to move past the denial. And also, I think people get more in tune with their feelings too, which is a really core piece of, I think, recovery work. People usually start this being very disconnected from what's going on, or maybe feeling only certain emotions and not others. And working on trait 10 is, I think, about opening up, being able to experience all of them, because that's kind of what we need to.
And in a sense, I almost want to ask people, so what? So let's say opening up some of these things that you've been minimizing for years and years. So what if that happens? What are you so afraid of?
Yeah.
In doing that? I mean, I'm here to tell you on the other side of it that my day-to-day life is better because of it. I think I can still be cautious.
Sure.
I am hyper aware of my surroundings. But I've also done a lot of work, so the more work you do, the more you know, the more you know what to watch out for sometimes. But it's worth it. It is well worth it, because my better days always feel free.
Yeah. I like that question. I think it's a really good question. Be like, yeah, what are we really afraid would happen if we dove into the...
Hey, what's going to happen?
All right. Shall we do the other module this time?
Oh, I forgot we had one more.
Yes.
The other laundry list side of trait 10 is we deny that we've been hurt and are suppressing our emotions by the dramatic expression of pseudo feelings.
Yeah. This is another one that, I hear a lot of interpretations on. And again, I'll put the caveat out there that, like, this is just kind of how I read it and how I think about it. People are probably likely to have their own views on it. I think about this one as like, so if the laundry list side is I stuff it, I don't remember it, I don't think about it, I don't feel it, or I deny that it ever happened or that it affected me. Other laundry list is like, I pretend to be able to talk about it, or I find ways to acknowledge it, but that it keeps me at the surface level. Don't really actually talk about it or really feel it. So the expression of pseudo feelings, I think of a few different ways. This could be something like, oh, I pretend that I feel a different way about it than I actually do. Like, I'm hiding my true feelings. I often talk about intellectualizing here.
Oh, yeah.
Where, and I'm cautious with this because, those of us who are analytically minded are, there's some strengths to that. But when all I think about is, yeah, this thing happened and I wonder if it impacted me in this way, and maybe it connected to this and maybe it did that. It's like, whoa. Where was there any second for me to create a space for me to be like, I felt bad about that, or I felt ashamed, or I felt angry, or I felt hurt. It kind of keeps us from our feelings when we talk about the analytical all side of it. So I think about intellectualizing as kind of falling into this side of things. Or maybe like I talk very casually about what I experienced and I'll tell my story to whoever. And this is a really hard distinction to make, but sometimes people can just say, oh yeah, that happened. And then they quickly move on to the conversation. But it's like they're trying to signal to other people, oh, see, look, I can talk about it. And a lot of times other people, maybe who don't really know all that much about it, probably say, oh, well, if they can talk about it, they must be all right with it. It must be fine. And so what that does is those people never ask more. They never actually touch it. It kind of keeps people at a distance because they just sort of assume that someone's already processed it. So there's like this subtle kind of protection mechanism that keeps you from like the deeper stuff still, on the other laundry list side. That's at least how I think about this showing up.
Yeah. And then you've been spending too much time in the fake feelings factory, which you don't want to stay in.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an easy thing to do, but I mean, my experience has been, and listen, sometimes I think I explain it very simply because I've done so much of it and I've cried so much about so many of these things that, because that's generally how I process things. You know, I'll think it through. Sometimes I've got to be careful about going to what you describe with the intellectual piece. You know, other times, you know, my creativity actually is I do more with that than I probably do the intellectual piece. But you got to be careful with that too.
Yeah.
Because creativity is what it is. I mean, it takes you to a lot of different places. You know, so.
You know, the other day, I heard you say something about like this kind of concept of like performing in meetings or something like that. And I'm wondering, like, do you feel like that kind of concept can relate to this at all?
Oh, for sure. And what I meant when I said that, Stephen, we're talking to the people that go to meetings and they're able to, you know, say the right things, but it's mechanical, really, you know, and so it's kind of a meeting performance. I'm putting out the information and I'm looking to see if you're paying attention and hey, did you like it?
Yeah, like I kind of like I've gone to a lot of meetings and I've heard other people say these things, and so I think, oh well, that's what I'm supposed to say. I'm gonna kind of just repeat it back.
You know, another thing that you'll see, like let's say someone's sharing maybe in an ACA meeting, is where they start the share on whatever the subject is, whether they're intellectualizing it or not, but they're starting to feel whatever, and then they move the conversation to relate it to a friend, a family member, a hey, I know a person that.
Yeah.
Well, guess what we want to know about? We don't want to know about the other person. We want to know about you.
Yeah, yeah, you can slowly distance, or we can distance ourselves from it, piece by piece, because it's not so close. It feels threatening. Yeah, I think that the other long distance retreat is really interesting. I mean, I bet there's probably plenty of other examples of this that we haven't discussed. But I think about this side as being like the really subtle things. There are subtle ways that we just say, okay, we'll talk about a little bit, but we're not going to really go into it. So same theme as the laundry list side for trait 10, which is we're protecting ourselves from really confronting the reality of our experience, emotionally, you know, psychologically, all that good stuff.
So there you have it. You have 9 and 10. Remember, there are 14. So we have a few more to go. I'm Billy Hoffman.
I'm Stephen Smith.
And that's the ACA Podcast.